In 2011, the world watched the Arab Spring in high definition. From Tahrir Square to Tunisia, the global media didn't just report the revolution, they fell in love with it. It was the Twitter revolution. But 13 years later, in July 2024, another revolution was happening. It was larger, bloodier, and more digital than ever before. It was Gen Z pushing back. It was an amazing story of the rise of a generation against a modern monster. And yet, news media around the world remained eerily quiet. While 1,400 students were being hunted by their own state, while helicopters were firing on rooftops, and 15-year-olds were being buried in unmarked graves, the global narrative was being managed and ensured by Hasina's friendly neighbors in Delhi. In Washington, it was business as usual. In London, it was garment sector unrest. The world failed to see the monsoon revolution, the Gen Z uprising, and the plight of 170 million Bangladeshis completely. For years, global media mentioned this country when factories collapsed, storms hit, or contracts shifted in the garment trade. Bangladesh appeared as a place of cheap labor and mass manufacturing, the second largest garment exporter, feeding Western brands. This is the nasty reality of the global lens. Bangladesh is only a headline when it burns, but even then, the world only listens when its neighbors say it's safe to do so. Singh personally intervened in 2014 to force the Jatiya Party into a sham election, providing the regime its first manufactured mandate. From that moment, India became the regime's primary global lobbyist, silencing Western human rights concerns by weaponizing the fear of extremism. But in July 2024, the job quota protest by the Gen Z started turning into state-sponsored public slaughter. Between July 15th and August 5th, the UN later estimated that up to 1,400 people were killed, not by clashes, but by a state-sponsored hunt using helicopters, assault rifles, and shoot-on-sight orders. For 11 days, the country was plunged into a total internet blackout. While students were being shot in the back in Yatrabari and Savar, the world's screens were empty. And the only source of information for global media was Indian media, because they were always telling the Bangladesh story, and Indian media was more than happy to provide cover for mass murder by Hasina. While 15-year-olds were being buried in unmarked graves, Indian news channels like Republic TV and Z News were pumping out a different reality. They didn't see a student uprising. They saw an ISI-backed Islamist insurgency. They gave the global community the excuse they needed to look away. By the time the West woke up, the bodies were already cold. Because the international media had outsourced their local coverage to Delhi-based bureaus for a decade, they missed the greatest democratic uprising of the century until the dictator was already on a helicopter to Hindon Air Base in India. Even after August 5th, monitoring groups like Rumor Scanner and Blackbird.ai documented a forensic surge in disinformation. 49 Indian media outlets were caught amplifying fabricated stories of a Hindu genocide to destabilize the transition before it could even sit in its chair. They used old videos of fires in Sakira or reunions at the border and rebranded them as Muslim mobs attacking Hindu women. Major outlets, NDTV, India Today, and Z News, reported that cricketer Leighton Das's house was burned. It was actually the home of a Muslim MP. The goal was simple: make the world fear a new Bangladesh more than the dictator they just overthrew. This reached a fever pitch with the case of Chinmoy Krishnadas, When the monk was arrested for sedition, Indian media portrayed it as religious persecution, sparking a mob to attack a Bangladeshi mission in Agartala. They claimed his lawyer was killed by Islamists. The lawyer was actually a Muslim named Saiful Islam, killed by the mob the monk was supposed to lead. To understand why the world stayed quiet, you have to look at media in India, the primary hub where the world's newsrooms outsource their view over Bangladesh. Over the last decade, India's media has been captured by corporate oligarchs. This is Godi Media, the lapdog press, and it serves as the filtered lens through which the West perceives South Asia. Simultaneously, 2 decades of economic growth have enticed Western media to hub regional operations in India. This has effectively allowed the story of 170 million Bangladeshis to be owned by bureaus in New Delhi and Mumbai. This corridor functions as the gatekeeper of regional truth. Mumbai acts as corporate HQ for giants like BBC and Reuters, while New Delhi serves as the source for security briefings. Yet India's own media landscape is in a state of terminal decay. It is now a red zone for journalism, rated 151 out of 180 in the Press Freedom Index. These hubs are dominated by a new class of press barons. Mukesh Ambani owns over 70 outlets reaching 800 million people. Gautam Adani conducted a hostile takeover of NDTV to erase one of the last critical, independent voices, again for PM Modi. These are the filters through which the Bangladesh story must pass. But the most damning evidence is the byline filter. Look at this Reuters report from January 20th, 2026. How an Islamist party is gaining ground in Bangladesh, worrying moderates. It was co-authored by Tora Agarwala, a journalist whose core focus is Indian border security and ethnic conflict in the Northeast. Why does this byline matter? Because when an agency brings in a specialist in ethnic strife to cover a political transition, the framing shifts automatically to security anxieties. The word Islamist appears 14 times. The central anchor of the story is an anonymous quote. "Today I fear for my life." This isn't a neutral snapshot. It is a strategic frame edited in New Delhi by Krishna Endas. By focusing on Islamic dogma and erasing the local context of the Gen Z alliances, the Bureau ensures that the West continues to view the Delta as a security problem to be managed, rather than a democracy to be supported. Why does this matter? Reuters is the world's primary news wire. This single story, curated by reporters embedded in the Indian security landscape, was picked up verbatim by thousands of outlets from London to Tokyo. Within hours, the nuanced reality of 170 million people was reduced to a security threat for a global audience. In India, reporters for Reuters and AFP have faced increasing scrutiny. In January 2026, journalists were summoned by police and pressured to sign peace bonds, pledges to avoid negative reporting. When the July uprising broke out, these bureaus were already operating in a climate of fear. This brings us back to Sujata Singh. She is the same person Delhi sent to force a manufactured mandate for Hasina in 2014. And yes, she was the same voice who surfaced in international corridors to sell a convenient lie, that this wasn't a student uprising, but an Islamist coup. While students were being hunted with assault rifles and gunships, Sujata Singh and the Mumbai-Delhi bureaus were busy rebranding the blood. They didn't see a generation fighting for dignity. They saw the Indian state directive to brand it Islamic and radical, or to push the story down altogether. And so, when the veil finally lifted on August 5th, 2024, the world saw the crowds at Gana Bhavan, a victory for the students and the fall of the dynasty. For a moment, the silence was broken. Al Jazeera and a few others committed to the ground reality. But for much of the Western press, the zoom in never happened. Instead of a democratic celebration, the Delhi-based bureaus offered the world a security warning. Why didn't they zoom in after August 5th? Because the global news cycle provided the perfect alibi. In the same week Hasina fled, the UK was exploding into its worst far-right riots in a decade. London and Manchester were burning. For the BBC and Sky News, the fire at home was more valuable than the revolution abroad. In the Middle East, the clock was ticking toward a regional war. Israel and Hezbollah were on the verge of a full-scale invasion. To a Western editor, a potential World War III in Lebanon is a front-page lead. A student uprising in the Bay of Bengal is a world brief. They didn't zoom in because they had already spent their crisis budget on the Levant. And then there was the American election. It was the peak of Harris versus Trump, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. In Washington, the Bangladesh story was viewed solely through the lens of, how does this affect our regional partner, India? If Delhi wasn't panicking, DC did not care. Venezuela was also in the streets, protesting a stolen election by Maduro. Global media, already primed for Latin American unrest, chose to focus on Caracas because it was closer to Florida than Dhaka was to Dubai. The reality? It was too late to enter. It was too inconvenient to care about. Maybe the bureaus didn't want to admit they had been wrong about Hasina for 15 years. Or maybe they were pressed by the peace bonds they were made to sig in New Delhi. It was easier to let the story die in the clutter than to explain why they missed the most significant democratic victory in modern history. After August 5th, the media in Bangladesh has fundamentally changed. For the first time in 16 years, the air felt lighter. Freedom House's 2025 assessment recorded the largest improvement in internet freedom of any country in the world. As the interim government repealed the draconian Cybersecurity Act and ended the era of state-mandated shutdowns. But the old regime's silence was replaced by a new kind of noise. As the internal walls came down, a massive campaign of cross-border disinformation rushed in. In the final 4 months of 2024, fact-checkers at Rumor Scanner documented 136 cases of fabricated news originating from India. 81% of these stories exploded on X, amassing over 250 million impressions. Global attention still follows a predictable pattern: spectacular tragedy, fast reporting, and then silence. The world sees the ruins of Rana Plaza or the Rohingya camps, but it misses the connective tissue, the banking collapse, the water disputes, and information independence. Because Bangladesh cannot afford to be understood only in extremes, it is not a choice between a miracle or a meltdown. The truth is heavier and harder to carry. Neutrality is not about staying quiet. It is about refusing to let any side, whether a neighbor's oligarchs or a fallen dynasty, write our story for us. For half a century, others have held the pen. Neighbors who saw a buffer or a client, donors who saw a laboratory, investors who saw cheap labor, and headlines that saw yet another Islamist angle from Delhi. But in July 2024, a generation stood up and demanded to be seen as citizens. The lesson of the Monsoon Revolution is that neutrality is not a gift from the West. It is a tool we must build ourselves. In a world where newsrooms can mute a massacre, the only way to be heard is to hold the line until the facts can no longer be ignored. But the story is far from over. On February 12, 2026, 127 million people will step out to do something they haven't truly done in a decade: vote in a competitive election. For many, it is a day of radical hope, a chance to build the second republic promised by the July Charter. Yet as the date nears, the air is thick with information bombs. The same disinformation hubs are now flooding social media with fake news to destabilize the ballot. From the ghost of the banned party to rising friction, the hazards are looming in the distance. Is this a democratic reset or just a return to the cycle? In our final chapter, we go to the streets to hear the mood of a nation standing on a knife's edge. Our next chapter discovers everything between hopes and hazards,